keep admitting people. First of all, I would like to welcome everybody to our webinar, and thank you for your presence here with us. Thank our speaker. The webinar will be recorded and the recording will be shared post-webinar. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to our webinar on war damages and the challenges of reconstruction. As you all know, Lebanon stands as at a pivotal crossroad, teeming with both immense opportunities and formidable challenges. The election of General Joseph Aoun as president marks a significant victory for institutional governance. We see it as really him and Judge Nawaf Salam, two eminent civil service, as a real victory for the institutions. And Nawaf Salam as Prime Minister, of course, his nomination underscores for us a profound commitment to justice, transparency, and accountability, values that he is very well known to uphold and that are desperately needed in these trying times. So as our nation embraces this new political landscape, there is a genuine opportunity felt by everybody to set in motion far-reaching reforms across Lebanon's state institutions. And the question is, can a new Lebanon built on structural renewal, on reinvigorated state institution, emerge from the ashes of past crises? Many of us are asking this question. If we refer to our great Khalil Gibran, there is a beautiful sentence I like a lot. He says, out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls, the most massive character are seared with scars. The asks are high. The path ahead is not without significant hurdle, including the toll of the war, which have worsened the already fragile state. It's estimated that over 25 billion will be needed to rebuild infrastructure, housing, and heritage site, as well address environmental challenges. So the immediate priorities, of course, as we know them, include ceasefire, security, return of the displaced. But again, the recovery is quite complicated and it requires bold, decisive financial, monetary, social reforms that can tackle long-standing crises. And this will demand, of course, lots of coordinated efforts, a very strong leadership, qualities that Lebanon must cultivate in abundance if it is to chart toward the future. So our distinguished speaker will explore this topic further. And our, of course, moderator, Mrs. Khouri, will moderate this session. I would like to end that this is on a probably a more cautious note, saying that for me, who has long lived in this country and been out in and out for so many years working around the region, looking at it from a bird's eye, we know that Lebanon has faced daunting task of post-war recovery many times. This is not the first time. And the country has endeavored to rebuild itself before, to reform itself before. Who doesn't remember the 90s, the post-90s, Bechtel Plan, the 26, the Paris 1, the Paris 2, the post-2006 Paris 3, the Stockholm, the Vienna Conference, and most recently all the efforts after the Beirut port blast. So it has been a work in progress since, but many failures too. So the question will remain, what are the lessons that we as a society, as a country, as institutions have learned from these past experiences, and how can they inform our path today? So distinguished speakers, you have lots of questions to answer, and I'm very, very thankful for your presence with us today. Mr. Jean-Christophe Carré, Madam Jaylan Al-Masiri, Mr. Ramzi Al-Hafiz, and Mrs. Kauthar Dara speaking on behalf of Blerta Aliko. And with that, I pass the floor to our moderator, Hasmi Khouri, who will introduce you and kick the discussion. But before that, few words about Hasmi, because she's not only a friend, but a great professional, a seasoned expert in the ESG and sustainability sector, and also a very active member of the Lebanese Economic, Social, and Environmental Council, who has focused a lot of her work on youth education, financial education, on poverty and environmental investment, poverty alleviation, environmental investment, sustainable development. And mostly beyond that, she is a passionata of community work and a published author and a wonderful mother of three successful children. She embodies all the values of women leadership that we'd like to see in the decision making positions, institutional and political. Over to you, Hasmik.
President Lamia, you make me feel bashful because from woman to woman, and we all believe in that line of thought. I first want to thank you personally for the opportunity and to the wonderful team at the Institute. Over the number of years I've collaborated with the Institute, I've met fantastic people, and I want to shout out to Zian Shibli, Sabine Hatem, and Basima Abdel Khaliq, who were part of putting this today's webinar together. I'm in awe in front of these Wednesdays at the Institute on webinars. I think this is a fantastic stepping stone for all of us to keep engaged, no matter what the wind brings along, no matter what challenges we have to face. I think this is a fantastic way of keeping us on our toes. Dear speakers today, just before we kickstart, and I have the privilege of introducing you, and to bring into the topic the core of our discussion, we have prepared a small video which we have taken from the UNDP actually, and I would like to use that video to kickstart this conversation. Just a minute for me to be able to put it on. And there it is. I hope you can all see my screen. And there we are.
Yes, it's fine. Yes.
So, like I said, just an introduction to the topic to get us all alert on what happened. It has a little bit of a shout out to the UNDP, but I think we're all in good company. Allow me to introduce Mr. Jean-Christophe Carré, who is the World Bank Country Director for the Middle East Department, Mashriq. Mr. Carré joined the World Bank Group in 2005 as a natural resource economist in the Africa region. In his current position, he provides overall strategic leadership for the bank's engagement in the countries that are covered, that is Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. He is a keen emphasis on job growth, sustainable growth, inclusion, and governance. He also manages the development of a strong analytical program that can inform policy and investment choices and public debate as countries aim to institute economic and political reform and or as they emerge from conflict. He is a French national. Mr. Carré holds a PhD in economics from the Mines Paris Tech. Hello, Mr. Carré. I'm going to do the round of introductions and then we'll start with the questionings. Ms. Ghislaine El Mesri, who is the UN Women Representative in Lebanon. Ms. Mesri was appointed as of April 2023 and she has over 25 years of professional experience in gender equality, women's empowerment, and again, sustainable development with a focus on advocacy and partnerships, policy analysis and coordination, program design and implementation. She managed various programs at the UN Women Flagship, including the areas of women financial inclusion, economic empowerment, eliminating violence against women, and access to justice. Prior to being stationed in Lebanon, Ms. Masri was in the country team for the UN Women in Egypt, where she served as deputy country representative and country representative since 2014. Welcome, Ms. Ghislaine. We regret to say that Ms. Blerta is not feeling very well, and we are honored to have Ms. Kausar Dara represent the UNDP. Kausar, if you allow me, has been working as a senior economist for the UNDP since 2020. She has more than 30 years of experience in diversified disciplines, including socioeconomic development, public financial management, public policy, and public sector reform. She has led and participated in several modernization and reform initiatives and in the development of the broad and sector-specific strategies and policies in Lebanon and the region, including Iraq, Egypt, Lebanon, UAE, and Kuwait. Her areas of expertise include public finance, public policies, economic development, education, social protection, child rights and child protection, gender, and others. She has a long-standing experience with major donor and international organizations, including several UN agencies, the World Bank, DFID, and others. Hello, Ms. Kausar, and you're welcome. Last but of course not least, and to complete the gender equal panel that we have today, Mr. Al-Hafiz is the founder of InfoPro, a leading firm specializing in publishing, business consultancy, and market research. They publish the Lebanon Opportunities, which is quite well known in the country, various business websites, and several periodicals and handbooks, including the upcoming Gender Handbook of Lebanon, which I'm looking forward to personally. The firm conducts market and economic research for international organizations, NGOs, multinational companies, and public sector, and organizes conferences and business events. With his expertise in as an economic as an expert in economy, Mr. Hafiz will give us the background on the socioeconomic development, humanitarian relief, private sector growth, labor and gender issues, the green economy, which is something we covered a couple of years ago. It seems only like yesterday. Mr. Hafiz has made significant contributions across these multiple fields. He is the publisher of The Gallery magazine, which focuses on the fine arts in Lebanon, and several boards of NGOs dedicated to microfinance, children's healthcare, and entrepreneurship. Welcome, Mr. Hafiz, to this wonderful, privileged board of panelists this afternoon. And if you allow me, we can start immediately. I would ask the audience to try to stay as much as possible patient. We do hope to wrap up by 5. If we topple over and we extend beyond 5, whoever can and is willing to stay on and ask your questions and get answers from our fantastic panelists, it would be great. If you would like to put your questions in the chat box, I will address them in due course. I do hope we do not interrupt our speakers so that their thoughts are not interrupted. But I hope that our panelists can interact as much as possible amongst each other as we start along the discussions. Mr. Carré, and I do invite all 4 of you to unmute yourself and feel free to contribute as we go along and ask questions. Mr. Jean-Christophe Carré, first question is for you. We have been informed of the Lebanon Interim Damage and Loss Assessment report that was published last November by the World Bank, and where it's estimated that the cost of physical damages and economic losses due to the conflict raise at $8.5 billion US. Damages to physical structures alone amount to 3.4, and economic losses reached over 5 billion US dollars. In the wake of Lebanon's renewing the political leadership, which Ms. Bayed just described briefly, how would you see the role of the World Bank in Lebanon to help address some of these issues in reconstruction, in recovery, tackling the priorities prevailing prior to the war, which were highlighted in various assessments and analytical studies. I remember we looked at together at the environmental report not long ago, and what is going to happen now.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well or relatively well?
Yes.
Thanks again for having me, and I'm very happy to be in a panel with Mrs. Dara and Mr. Hafez. So I'll try to be brief, and then you can ask for some follow-up questions. So as you rightly pointed out, Mrs. Khoury, we published in November an interim damage and loss assessment, which calculated at the time the cost of war at $8.5 billion. So our first action to some extent, or our next step today, and we are currently working on it, is to update this assessment. So that's our number one priority. So a couple of information about the update. First, and of course, the assessment that we published in November was, the period was between October 8, 2023 and October 27. So it was before the end of the conflict. So the first objective of the update is to cover the entire period of the conflict from October 8 to December 20. That's number one. Number two, we have decided upon government request to add a couple of sectors that were not in the first assessment. So we have added, and I see a colleague from the Ministry of Energy and Water, we have added water, wastewater and irrigation, transport and energy to the assessment, and also municipal services to understand a little bit how the governance of the reconstruction may or may not happen. So that's number two. So we have expanded the number of sectors. But most importantly, and that's my main message on this first question, we are in November, we have published a study that was estimating, and there are other estimations, and I think it's good to have different views on how much it costed. In November, we publish only the cost of war, so to say. DALA is a little bit of a complicated acronym. So what we are going to do this time is to update the cost of war by taking a longer period, taking additional sectors into account that were impacted, because we know, for example, that a lot of roads and bridges have been destroyed, to mention one example. But we are also going to calculate the cost of reconstruction and the cost of recovery, taking into account all these sectors. So this time, the study that is going to be published sometime around end of February, it will be not only the cost of war, but the cost of reconstruction and recovery. And my last point, which is probably the most important, is that last time we did it on our own. This time it will be a joint publication between CNRS and the World Bank in coordination with the UN and the EU. So there will be a much broader base of stakeholders participating one way or another, either by directly writing with us or by reviewing what we have written, the report. So that's, and of course, and I should say it first and foremost, because CNRS will author the study, it will be a Government of Lebanon study. So before we can publish it, it will have also to be reviewed by the government itself. So I think I may want to stop here in the interest of interacting with panelist colleagues.
Yeah,
so that's our first contribution. And sorry, Madame Khoury, and it's an important contribution because we are not only a money bank, we are a knowledge bank. And I think it's something important that we can provide to client countries. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for updating our information and giving us some new information to look forward to, and having the CNRS definitely and partnering on this. Definitely, I agree that the World Bank is not just a bank, it's a bank of information. And here I would like to jump in to our bank of information with Mr. Hafiz, if you allow, as an economic expert and based on the results of the survey conducted in October 2024 with the medium and large companies. What are some of the most relevant risks and challenges that you observed in our current situation, focusing on the revival of the trade and industry sectors? How do you estimate the human and the material losses and their revival, plugging into what Mr. Carré just informed us with? And I do realize there's probably updates on that as well, but on the numbers and figures. But let us know what you have seen and observed so far, please, Mr. Haf.
Okay, as I'm going to focus on the private sector, since the World Bank is doing a very good job on the public sector and on the macroeconomic side. As the crisis that has started in 2019 started to settle down without any real measures taken by anyone to deal with the issues that this crisis has created, the private sector has started to adapt, of course, each company on its own, to the new realities, and have started to emerge and hire again and invest again and expand their work. Then came October 7, the Gaza disaster, and Lebanon's involvement bit by bit into that conflict. And so what we had seen in the beginning as indicators for growth in various sectors, we've seen growth in salaries, we've seen growth in sales, we've seen growth in even in the general mood of the private sector. All this we had hit a break because people were worried about what's going to happen with Lebanon involved in the Gaza conflict. So the economic growth had the promise of economic growth had tempered down, but still the private sector readapted again and again. And in spite of all the risks that were perceived at the time, we had seen quite a bit of activity on the private sector level. Then the direct war on Lebanon had started, and we have seen total panic in the private sector. We have seen companies laying off employees. We have seen salaries being brought down. We have seen projects being halted. And we have seen, again, intentions to emigrate from the youth, which has never stopped. So today we are at the point where we are left with all the former problems, in addition to new problems that are caused by the destruction. We have a major part of our economy that has been totally destroyed, which is especially in the areas that were directly hit by Israel, which is the south, the suburbs of Beirut, and some areas of the Bekaa. And that has taken a chunk of our, taken out a chunk of our economy. So while we are very happy today that there has been a ceasefire, let's hope it maintains, and there is a very positive sentiment in the street and on the new political leadership, and probably extremely high expectations, maybe over expectations, because the challenges are so big. The private sector still has to deal with the same issues, and with a caretaking government that hasn't done much for the private sector. With the new government that's going to come in hopefully soon, that will inherit all of these problems. But still, in the best case scenario, it will take it quite a long time before things will start moving. The private sector is left alone, each company on its own, trying to live up to its reputation of resilience. Although, I mean, it's a forced state. It's not a choice, and companies have to make plans in an uncertain future. So it's very difficult for companies to make any medium or long-term plans or projections because today we're on Wednesday. We don't know on Sunday when the ceasefire comes to a point of whether it's going to remain or not. We don't know. And there is nothing in our entire ecosystem that creates support to the private sector. I think I'll stop here and listen to more questions.
Thank you for your contribution. I think I want to go to Ms. Dara now. And again, for all four of your panelists, if at any point any of you can feel that you can contribute to the statements of the other, please do not hesitate. Ms. Dara. The UNDP published the rapid assessment of the impact of the war with the video that we just saw as well, that highlights a bit of those numbers. You were among the first international communities to support Lebanon through the government-led response efforts and the essential basic services that affected populations. How would you assess this collaboration with the government, and where do you see it going? Where is this relationship?
Thank you, Hasmek. As you also rightly pointed out, we did like our share of assessment, to put it this way. We did more than one. We did one at the onset of the conflict in last December in 2023. It was a very quick assessment of the main of the impact of the war at that time. And we did another one at the eve of Paris conference last October, also it was more broad and a rapid appraisal of to take stock of the impact of the war. Of course, these assessments are mainly used to guide our programmatic activities, and also we aim to inform also the government recovery plans as part of it. We are now in the process of doing further assessment. We are now concluding an MSME survey, and this is to complement what Mr. Hafiz hinted to. We have the private sector. We have a very big interest, if you want to understand what's happening with the private sector, because we have programmatic activities with the private sector and with the line ministries that are if you want, the governance ministries dealing with the private sector, namely the Ministry of Economy and Trade and Ministry of Finance. So now we are concluding it. We had a digital survey. We reached around 8,500 MSMEs and livelihood activities with, if you want, full profile of the damage incurred to these MSMEs. Also, we are now in the process. We will be launching in 2 days' time another also assessment with the Ministry of Agriculture to understand the impact of the war at the land, of course, and at the farmer level. So this will be starting soon. You said it also, we are among the international agencies directly engaged with the government in terms of provision of services. But most importantly, the work of UNDP with the government goes at 2 levels. We work with the center at the central level, and we work at the local level. At the central level, we work to make sure that we have to have strengthened institution and to ensure that the governance systems are in place to be able to manage and respond to the crisis. And one manifestation or one example of our work with the government is our work with the disaster risk management unit that is hosted in the Prime Minister office, which is completely fully almost supported by UNDP, and it played a critical role during the crisis, during the war, mainly in managing, coordinating the displacement crisis. We also worked with the Ministry of Economy and Trade. We used our assessment to tailor or to customize our programs to respond to the crisis. We have a program supporting productive sector or businesses, MSMEs. We tailored this program in response to the crisis. And now we have a program with the Ministry of Economy and Trade. First of all, we established we established a grant scheme to support affected enterprises. And also we established a help desk for the MSMEs and the Ministry of Economy and Trade, and we'll also be expanding our support to the private sector. I will just mention some examples of what kind of support. Also, we are, as Mr. Carey said, also we are supporting the CNRS, because CNRS is a core, I think, institution in the response to the crisis, mainly as CNRS is a dedicated entity, if you want, a delegated entity by the government to do the geospatial analysis for the war. And all of us, we are supporting CNRS, of course, everyone from a perspective. At the local level, of course, we tailored our program. We're working with, we have offices, area offices across Lebanon and North Lebanon, South Lebanon, Bekaa, Mount Lebanon, everywhere. And we are supporting tens and maybe hundreds of municipalities and units of municipalities. During the war, UNDP again adapted its programs to support, mainly to support the IDPs and the host communities of the IDPs. Seeing it forward, building on the past, and to see how we're going to support, or how we're going to continue to work with the government. Of course, our work with the government is based on on guiding principles that we adhere to. The first one is we follow needs-based approach and people-centered approach. We support the people. We go directly. We care about the dollar sign. Of course, we care about the dollar sign, but also we care about the suffering of the people and how we can support people regaining their income, their livelihood, regaining their to go back to their communities in a dignified way. So this is one of the principles. Another principle is to work within the overarching policy that the government, whenever it is available, to ensure ownership and also to align our programs with the priorities of the government and the government counterparts we're working with. Also, we try to ensure synergies and complementarities within the institution and across institution to optimize the very rare resources nowadays. For the way forward, our work with the government will be adhering to these principles, and which are really particularly needed in the phase, on the recovery phase of Lebanon for the coming period. I'll stop in here. I'm happy to answer any questions on UNDP's contribution during the last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zara. I want to give the opportunity to have Ms. Ghislaine start by contributing as well. Because we talked about the people-centered approach that Ms. Zara just wrapped up with her contribution. Ms. Ghislaine, I want to poke at the UN Women and the representation that you have here in the Lebanon, and ask you, how would you incentivize both the private sector that Mr. Hafiz talked about and the civil society that Ms. Zara talked about to become more active, especially when we come to talk about the DEI, the diversity, equity, inclusion, at the aftermath of the current challenges in the country and the rebuilding, and thinking as well about the exodus of the youth that Mr. Hafiz reflected on. So all this ambiance that we're thinking of, where is the role of the UN Women and what are you looking for?
Thank you so much for for inviting UN Women to be a part of this panel. I think despite women's central role in providing relief during the past conflict, including also in de-escalating and resolving community conflicts, their role is often seen as peripheral, and their issues tend to take a back seat during the crisis, and it's seen as less important until we achieve economic recovery. But there is a very strong need to balance the need for economic growth with reconstruction of physical infrastructure and with those of greater social justice and equity, which have been drivers of conflict both at the local and the community level. And within the focus on equity, there is the need to focus on reducing gender inequalities, which hinder development. And without the deliberate efforts to incorporate a gender perspective, any future reconstruction initiatives will really be compromised. I don't want to get into the data because I think many of us know that women tend to be more unemployed. They tend to own less assets. They tend to be slotted in jobs and livelihoods that have lower pay, lower remuneration. We know that in Lebanon, maternity leave is below the regional, most of its peers in the Arab states region, and below the minimum 14 weeks mandated by the ILO. And of course, this also results in lower pensions for women because of interrupted working life across their careers due to issues related to care. So because of all of that, there is an important opportunity now to create new social structures. And here I just want to point in two important ways of engaging women in terms of these new social structures. One is in terms of their full and meaningful participation in governance systems, whether this is within the composition of the upcoming cabinet, whether it's filling in the civil service that needs to be filled, whether in the new national councils, whether in some of the priorities that have been highlighted by the president, such as the independence of the judiciary or electoral reforms, but also with respect to specific legal reforms, such as the importance of having a specific quota, a gender quota for women. So I think the meaningful participation of women in governance systems is crucial, but I also want to underline the second area, which we also work across as UN Women, which is around social policies and paid work policies. And here I want to emphasize work policies being both paid and unpaid work. We've worked closely with the Parliament to also advocate for expanding childcare services. But also, I think one of the areas where we need to intensify effort is related to social protection floors, including a minimum wage, because women tend to be among the poorest. But also, if you look at the majority of women's employment or a substantial portion of women's employment, you do see it when it comes to self-employment. And here I would also argue that there are ways of improving self-employment beyond conventional labor market approaches, which has to do with women's regular, what affects them and what do they find employment. And here I would argue for the importance of extending services, basic services, of course, electricity, transport, etc., but also protecting them from harassment. I think these are really important areas. I also want to emphasize the importance of social policies, social transfers, expanding the social protection for women, for people with disabilities, as also in important areas. In terms of the aspects of diversity, I understand the private sector is quite facing a lot of challenges, a lot of difficulties. It's very hard for them to obviously be receptive to issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What I can point and say is that I think a big part of the challenge we have when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that it tends to be seen as a zero-sum game, where if one person gets more, then another person will get less. Whereas it is really more about expanding the pie, and it's about also how do you integrate aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion into the operational business outcomes, and how do you also use that to expand perspectives and improve the bottom line, knowing full well that, of course, the issues around corporate sustainability, given the current economic climate and the challenges that were highlighted about the private sector, it's a hard sell, of course. Now, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Definitely a hard sell. But it doesn't mean that the private sector has really let down all their arms. I think, Mr. Hafiz, perhaps you can comment on, especially that you have the better perspective of the four participants on the private sector, and give us a little perspective on how the private sector would gain, in your opinion, and in the contribution that Ms. Gilan just made on DII principles, and surmounting these challenges, and exactly what she said is making the pie bigger for more to be served rather than dividing it. Would you care to contribute as such?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Hazmi. Well, let's divide the private sector into two camps to simplify things, since we don't have a lot of time. We have those, the converted, the believers, and then the non-believers. And I think we should have a two-track approach, a short-term track and a long-term track. The short-term track is to enable the believers to expand their pie, because as they have more opportunities, they're going to create expansion within their companies, or expand their companies and add new participants. And those believers are usually also smart business people, and therefore will be able to integrate more diverse pool of resources into their workplace, from their suppliers, and how to find new clients. The long track is to convert the non-believers into believers, and there are, of course, many challenges, but they are not unsurmountable. Whether they are challenges of perception, challenges of means, or just proving the economic equation and the business equation, and showing that more diversity, more inclusion is more fairness, and more fairness leads to more profits. When you address yourself to a larger pool of clients, when you have a larger pool of employees, when you have a larger pool of suppliers, you're going to end up with more business and more profit. We have to be able to translate these ideas into actionable plans. But I see that the private sector, especially in Greater Beirut, but also in other areas, being more inclusive, not just because it's nice, but because it is an economic necessity.
Thank you. I think we have a better scope of things right now. Mr. Carré, how would you see the governance of this reconstruction process, and the stakeholders that you have mentioned that are in the process of having more and more partnerships, which is something I think we all on the site here agree that these partnerships can only bear more fruit to the betterment of Lebanon. So do you see the local civil society in a role in the process? I mean, you mentioned the CNRS, but how about the smaller players in civil society? And what are some of the best lessons that we've learned as as a continuation of the challenges that we face, namely maybe the Port of Beirut blast, and moving forward from there on?
Thanks a lot for the question. So I was mentioning CNRS in the context of a knowledge product. But as you all know, the role of the World Bank is to combine knowledge and some financing. So the way I see the contribution of the World Bank to not only the reconstruction and recovery process, but also to the possibilities that the reconstruction and recovery process take place in a well-governed environment, is by bringing some financing to the table. So let me maybe take 2 minutes to explain. So in addition to prepare together with the CNRS and in coordination with the UN and the EU, a new and updated assessment of the cost of war and the cost of reconstruction and recovery, we are also already preparing a project that could finance part of the emergency reconstruction. And by emergency reconstruction, what we have discussed with our government counterpart is 3 broad topics, which are very important and should probably come first. First, and it has to some extent already started, it is the safe rubble removal, sorting, and recycling. And by the way, the updated cost of war and cost of reconstruction will provide an accurate number on how much rubbles do you have as the results of the war in the country and how much it will cost to remove them. So we may want to finance the safe removal of rubble, but not only the removal, the sorting and the recycling, because as you know, and I have discussed with a lot of think tank and environmental NGO, now there is the possibility to recycle a large percentage of the rubble. So you don't have to throw the rubble anymore somewhere. You can use them to rebuild the country, at least in part. So we are interested in financing this activity. We are also interested to finance what we call small grant to support owner-driven housing repair for light damages. So let's assume that you were living somewhere and your apartment or your house has been partly damaged by the war. We are ready, in consultation with the government, to provide grants to the people so that they can buy themselves new windows or new doors and repair their home when it has been slightly damaged. That's the second areas where we can intervene. And last but not least, and I see that we still have Khaled online, we have also discussed with the government the possibility to restore critical service delivery in priority areas. And when we talk about service delivery, we talk about transport, mobility, because roads and bridges have been destroyed, energy, water, wastewater, health, and education. So we can repair also the damages. So how do we contribute to a better governance of the reconstruction and recovery process by financing these activities? In 2 ways, and it is similar to the project we have recently approved for this country. First, we will ask that in exchange of financing this activity, the government takes measures to improve governance and efficiency in the process of implementing this activity. So we will make sure that we increase transparency of all the processes where we are intervening. And second, and it answers to the last part of your question, Madame Khoury, we will finance third-party monitoring agencies, most likely from the civil society, who could monitor what's happening in the rubble removal activity and what's happening in the housing repairs activity, which are two activities where we know that governance can be a challenge and should be improved. So once again, the way the World Bank could contribute to improve governance of the reconstruction and recovery process is by financing these activities and putting in place measures that can improve the governance of these activities in exchange of the financing. Over.
Thank you. I think this is music to everybody's ears, and I don't know if you can access the chat and read MP
I will
Najat
read it afterwards. I didn't.
I think this is
okay.
music to everybody.
Music, okay,
because,
Najat, yes, okay. Madame Najat.
Because I happen to know as well
Honorable
that
Najat, yes, yes.
Yes, I know that the safe removal of the rubble and actually recycling it was one of the biggest issues that were being discussed by the Minister of Environment, who happened also to be the chairperson to the war refuge issues that we were facing. So that is something that we always salute.
And Madame Khoury, if I can add one thing, because I think it's important. You know, sometimes governments are calling the bank because they cannot finance a project and they need our financing. In the case of Lebanon and in the case in particular of removing the rubble, it's not the case. The country is going to finance disrespectively of whether or not the World Bank is intervening. You are going to finance the removal of the rubble. What I'm saying is that if we are asked to help financing an activity that you will finance no matter what, then we may improve the governance of what's going to happen in this activity. That's where the added value is. It's not by bringing the financing only. It's by bringing our norms, our standards, and making sure that they are part of the legal agreement that we are going to sign if we were to finance the activity. Over.
Yeah, thank you. And absolutely, the sorting and the recycling of that is key here. Yeah, she says thank you. I think another one of the comments that we had, and this would go for all of our all our speakers, would be one of the Mr. Haddad says there's the fragility of the ceasefire and which way to go to. I think Mr. Hafiz, you were reflecting on that, and the reassurance that we have of the way forward. Ms. Dara, would you care to comment on that aspect of, I don't know if it's in your scope of responsibilities, but I would really like the UNDP to contribute here. Unless Mr. Carré, I see you raising a finger as well.
Oh, and I forgot to say something that is very important because I know there is a lot already of debate around reconstruction and recovery. What I'm saying, the possibilities that we finance the three activities I have mentioned is still under discussion. And in particular, because there are new authorities now, it will have to be confirmed by the new authorities, it will have to be discussed in the country, it will have to be agreed by senior management at the World Bank, presented at the board of the bank. So what I'm giving you is some things that we are thinking about and we are discussing with counterparts in the country, but it's still under preparation. So nothing confirmed yet, and it will take 1 or 2 months before we can give the final details of the agreement. Just so, because I know that sometimes people react to what we are saying, so it's under discussion. Thanks.
So basically, you're asking people not to knock on your door tomorrow morning and say, "Are you giving us grants on these projects?"
No, I don't want people to say, "Oh, but why are you doing this or this?" We are contemplating doing these things, and we are discussing with authorities, with counterparts in the ministry, and we are assessing the cost and benefits of doing this or not doing this or doing this differently. So it's we are at the technical assessment of all these.
From my understanding and from my interpretation of what you're saying, it's super clear, Mr. Carré. I think it's fair to say that you have been very, very clear I think something, but I would like to continue. We still have you a little bit longer, right, Mr. Carré? It's okay. So I would like to hear from Ms. Dara on as discussed, on the fact of having the reconstruction process, and how is that civil society engagement happening in your perspective, taking into consideration everything that Mr. Carré just mentioned on that aspect, and the civil society input as well.
Okay, thank you. Definitely, I'll start from where Mr. Carré was talking about, and it's very essential to link any support to the government with a governance improvement, because otherwise we are losing the momentum. We're losing the right moment. Maybe Lamia said it at the very beginning. We are in a crisis, it's true, but let us use this crisis to our in our favor. And I'm not saying like putting conditionalities, but at least supporting the government while doing these activities, supporting the governance structures, and creating an enabling environment. And this is true, particularly true, because we cannot delink the war from the 5 years of crisis that happened before. And these 5 years really drained the resources and the capacities of the government institutions. And we have to be very mindful of that. While we want this any recovery plan to be government-led, and we want like the priorities of the government to be considered, we are very mindful that the government capacities need to be built. Otherwise, we will be doing the work, and we cannot do the work on behalf of the government. We want the government to take lead, and this is very essential. So, as Mr. Carré said, this is, I think, in any recovery plan, and I assume this project is part of the recovery plan, and you're hinting to a very, I think, very well selected priorities on the rubber removal, on really the priority of housing, on the priority of regaining access to specific services in remote areas. From our perspective as UNDP, and maybe I said it in the first round of questions, that we are working together with the government. For instance, as I said, I reiterate that we're working, for instance, with the Ministry of Economy and Trade to build the capacity. We're doing the survey. The survey will be handled to the Ministry of Economy and Trade, so they can take over and proceed with supporting the private sector, or creating the enabling environment for the private sector. They will have then the tools, and we will be supporting the ministry to play its role. Definitely, and this is what we said it in our second report, that stabilization of the institution should be part of the recovery process. Sometimes it's looked at as more of a development or longer term development aspect, but in the case of Lebanon now, this is core in the recovery. I don't want to repeat myself, but if we don't support core institutions, we will be losing the opportunity really to start reforming or modernizing our institution. On the civil society, definitely the civil society has a key role to play, and you mentioned it, maybe Hasmik, that we want to, I think, to draw on the lessons learned from the previous engagement of the civil society in the post-Black plus 3RF, the framework. How we can invest from these lessons in engaging further, or in better engagement of the civil society. Particularly, I will mention one area that could be, or two areas that could be really an area that the civil society may be interested in, is ensuring transparency and effectiveness of aid. And this is a key. But to do that, we should have in the government mechanism or a structure that would enable civil society to have information, at least on where the aid is coming from and where it is going. And on this, I'll maybe mention that we are now supporting the Prime Minister office in creating such a structure, a coordination structure. It will entail like some policy coordination, and it will also basically it will have an aid coordination function to improve transparency and to, if you want, to improve aid effectiveness. So this is an area. Another area is like advocating for the priorities, because the war resulted really in massive destructions across everything. Roads, infrastructure, lands, agriculture, schools, hospitals, etc. So we need really a third eye with the between the government and the development agency. We need a third eye that could really support in the prioritization, given that the resources are not really, will not really have a massive flow of resources. That's why we have to pick quite wisely our battles and see, and maybe the civil society could provide this, if you want, a third eye to guide the recovery. I'll stop in here in case any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Da. I would like to address again Ms. Ghislaine and give her a little bit of insight onto this conversation. Ms. Ghislaine, I happen to know that there are quite a number of institutions in Lebanon in the private sector that are working, and perhaps even some NGOs that we are well aware about, that are working towards the women empowerment principles, the WEPs. We know that there are results that have been achieved there, or as shy as these may be. Would you care to comment on that and bring it into the relationship between what you just stated in the first statement you made about the reforms that the government is currently facing, and about making these women empowerment principles work as much for the public sector as they have been working for the private sector?
Yes, certainly. So for those that are not familiar with the women's empowerment principles, they are a set of 7 principles that basically aim to strengthen the way the private sector integrates gender equality and women's empowerment. And it really is about improving the way the businesses function, integrate human rights, and women's empowerment. It's meant to be able to do good, but also improve economic and improve the bottom line for businesses. And I mean here also very practical suggestions or ideas, for instance, financial products that have women in mind, or integrating women in the supply chain or distribution chains of private companies, more women-owned businesses, for example, or supporting venture capitalists or impact investors to support in women entrepreneurs. So these are some of the very practical ways where you can do good, but also increase your bottom line and improve the business's performances. How is it doing? I mean, it's not geared to the NGOs. The Women's Empowerment Principles is a set of 7 principles that's online if you're interested to learn more about it. It's geared towards more the private sector. We have developed it in collaboration with, the Global Compact, who were our partners in developing it. There are a number of companies that have signed onto the women's empowerment principles. It requires a high-level corporate commitment at the CEO level, and really also execution. What we have done in other countries is to support the companies in conducting an internal self-assessment. So they assess themselves against specific benchmarks set against those 7 principles in terms of how they fare. And then we support them in developing an action plan that they identify in terms of how they can accelerate progress on these set of principles. And as I said, it could be, for instance, integrating more women-owned businesses at the different levels of your supply chain, et cetera. In relation to the context in Lebanon, I think we've worked with a number of private sector companies to adopt the WEP, but also very much to to identify those sectors that have a high, that basically to achieve two things. One is that looking at those economic sectors that have a large employment for a large potential for creating jobs for women. So we've identified those sectors through an input-output analysis that we have developed, and we will be launching this study very soon in order to see, you know, where are the sectors that have the highest potential for employing women, but also what are the types of skills, green skills, or other types of skills that are needed in order to drive growth towards those sectors, and also be able to take advantage of a very educated workforce in Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you for contributing in that way. The WEPS is one of my driving energies as I'm a founding member of the UN Global Compact Network here in Lebanon. So yes, Mr. Carré, I have a question in the chat box that's addressed to you. So as it says, and here you're free to answer or not. Would it be fair to assume that the World Bank financing of war reconstruction efforts will not also be contingent on the implementation by the ROL of reform plans required by the IMF and the international community to kick off restructuring aid? I think what you reflected on earlier is not very clear to some. Please contribute to that.
Thanks. So I can answer. And by the way, the World Bank is part of the international community, so not as if we are aside. So look, this is something that is currently under discussion, whether or not. So there is a public debate about whether or not any financing of the reconstruction of Lebanon should be tied to reform, and I think. It's a debate where we need to be nuanced. What we may want to consider is that there is, in the reconstruction and recovery process itself, that there are at least two phases, the urgent one and the not so urgent, because after such a war and billions of dollars of damage and losses, you are not going to rebuild the country overnight and to relaunch the economy overnight. So it's going to take months, if not years. So what may be considered, and again, this is a debate and I don't have the final answer, is that maybe the beginning of the reconstruction, what we call the emergency reconstruction, could be not tied to reforms, while the second phase of the reconstruction and the recovery should probably be tied to reform. So that's one way of seeing the issue. Another way also is to say that even the first phase of the reconstruction, what I call emergency reconstruction, should be tied to reform, in particular, governance reforms of the institutions that are going to implement the emergency project, which I think this is where the World Bank is gearing towards. We need to be careful. In a previous webinar on the reconstruction and recovery debate, what everybody has agreed upon is that after a war, you shouldn't rush to rebuild without thinking at the broader perspective, as my colleagues, for example, from the UNDP has said. You should think twice. And it's not only about getting money and spending it quickly. It's building back better, it's improving governance, it's making sure that the reconstruction is part of the overall vision of a country, not only rebuilding itself, but also rebuilding its credibility, because before the war, there were a lot of questions about governance. So I think we need to have a discussion around what needs to be tied to which phase of the reconstruction and recovery process. But I think it's not only for the World Bank to decide, but it's for the people of Lebanon, the government of Lebanon. I see other MPs on the screen is for also the parliament. People have to decide what they want. At the end of the day, we are only a knowledge and a money bank. We are not everything in Lebanon. So we are only contributing to a process that should be led by the country itself. Thanks.
Thank you. We all noticed that there are a few of our MPs and our maybe former minister in the room with us on the screen. Right now, I want to see if any of them would like to address any direct questions, because I happen to know that Mr. Carré would be leaving in a few minutes. So before we thank him, is there something, Mr. Hafiz, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would like to follow up a little bit on the issue of governance, because here we leave the technical part of that conversation and we enter directly into a political one, because if we're going to look at the governance issue only from a technical way, we're not going to reach anywhere. Today, with the political landscape remains the same. It's more or less the same political players, regardless of who's stronger than who, etc. But it's the same cast. And even with the current change in leadership, I mean, we still have the same people in parliament, the same people in the ministries, the same administration. And we also have, until now, the same pool of donors: the World Bank, the UN organizations, the EU, the USAID, etc. So are we talking, and the needs are huge. In the first assessment of the World Bank and others, if you add up all the numbers, you easily reach $10 billion, if not more. And about 3 billion of them are in housing, about $500 million of them are in health. And we're not going to list all the numbers of education and other economic sectors. So that invites huge appetite from the usual suspects to have a say in this, to have a hand in this, and to try to practice what's been practiced until now. So how will the donors who they have to forgive me, but they have been partners in the past and the whole mechanism, is it enough to make some changes in some procedures, or is this really a major overhaul? And the major overhaul, as Mr. Carré says, takes a long time. Do we have time?
Do we have time is the question you're asking to Mr. Carré, right? Do we have time now to answer all of this?
Not just to Mr. Carré, since you said we have parliamentarians and ministers
yes,
in the audience. They are more responsible than Mr. Carré.
I think, yeah, exactly. I totally agree, and I think we should hear from the two MPs who are nicely participating to the conversation. And then I will ask permission to leave by the way.
But I will ask you to stay for 2 more minutes, because I want to give the word to our dear MP Najat, and then followed by MP Fadi. Hello, how are you?
Hi.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation. And I just want to say that Mr. Carré and all the invitees said it right, that there is a huge responsibility on us to actually put the reform on track. We just only hope that the funders can put more strict conditions on how the money is going to be spent, and there will be monitoring and evaluation after that. I think we might not be able to put forth the best practices that we would like us to see, but at least the conversation is different today. It is different than it was in 2006, and we look forward to improving as we go along. I'm very hopeful, and I really want to thank all the hosts and all the invitees for the beautiful interventions they have. We are progressing, and we are progressing slowly, and we'll definitely have to do the reforms that we as parliamentarians are responsible for. Thank you, Azmi. Thank you, everyone, for all the good work. Thank you.
Welcome, MP Fadi.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry for being a bit late due to time constraints. I'm just concerned about not having an overall master plan, because usually we do stuff in a chaotic way. And my concern would be that after the destruction and the war and the disasters that we've been through, that we should have had a master plan. We should have it now. And I've had successive meetings with the IMF, and tomorrow I have another meeting with the IMF. And we have to have a comprehensive plan of what needs to be done. And that comprehensive plan also starts with the proper, adequate assessments. So we have an issue. United Nations agencies prefer to do their own assessments. The Lebanese government might be interested in doing it through certain governmental agencies. The World Bank might be interested to do the proper surveying and assessments through their own agencies. And the whole thing starts there. If we're going to have to throw a number or assess how much we need for the reconstruction phase, it has to be credible, it has to be transparent, and I think this is what needs to be done, and we haven't done that yet. So we need to first unify what needs to be among the World Bank, IMF, United Nations agencies, and then decide how it's going to get done. And my concern, my final note would be, if we're going to link all this to certain reforms hung in the parliament at this point, has to do with the bank restructuring, has to do with so many other reforms. I think we're going to be in it for a while. We're looking forward to having a new cabinet, an active new cabinet. And I think it's going to be a while for the ministers to take over their portfolios, to put their plans together. And I don't think Lebanon can afford the luxury of time at this point. That's what I wanted to say, and thank you again for this great venue.
Thank you for contributing. Any further comments? Mr. Kaya, would you like to answer? Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I look forward to continuing the discussion in other spaces, because I think it's an important one. But on the last remark from MP Fadi Alame, I mentioned at the beginning that the new assessment of the cost of war and cost of reconstruction, this time we will do it in full partnership with CNRS. So at least, and so it will be a government-owned program, and it will be done in consultation and coordination with the UN and the EU. So I hope that it will satisfy your legitimate request for single assessment. That's the only small point I wanted to add. But again, what both MPs have said and raised are important questions, and I think it's not the end of the discussion. And thank you for having me. I will have to leave because I have another event. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you for being with us, Mr. Carré, and hopefully we'll continue, like you said, this conversation in other rooms and other opportunities. Bientôt. In pursuing, I would like to invite anyone in the audience that has any question to bring up. I mean, we have a few of our MPs in the room. I, for one, would like to also address what you mentioned, MP Fadi. You talked about a plan. And coming from the private sector with a little bit of experience, a very small experience in the public sector, especially through the council, I would have imagined from the private sector has taught us that risk governance and the risk management and coming out of any challenging situation, institutions would normally have a plan of a comeback. And here I understand that we are hoping to have a plan ASAP, except that we still have to think about the reforms and all of that, which we know we cannot go forward except with reforms. I've heard the contributors in the room and the fantastic panelists that we've had talk about partnerships and synergies and having a new social structure. And I look at my very humble experience at the level of the Economic and Social and Environmental Council, where we have interventions and participants and members from across the room, from across the country, from across the different, and I feel like what was stated earlier about the surfacing of a new social structure where the everyday citizen from both the private and the public sector, with all the experience and the wealth of knowledge that the Lebanese have, and that we take this abroad, that we can actually contribute beyond the political shenanigans in the country and be able to actually make a difference by reducing the inequalities Ms. Gillen spoke about, by improving the bottom line, by talking about to the converted and the non-converted that Mr. Hafiz spoke about. So please help me see this plan and perhaps the new social structure where we're talking about these synergies and the different partnerships. And I've seen what the World Bank has done to extend the arm to the local government is making a big impact. And why can't we pick up from that?
Do you want me to go ahead and answer, or at least to make a comment?
Please, whoever has an answer, please go ahead.
This is my second term in the public sector in the parliament. I come from the private sector, so I'm still the vice president of the private hospitals and the president of the Arab Hospitals Federation. So I'm still inclined to the private sector. I still believe that private sector is the engine for growth. And I'm one of those people that advocate use and utilization of the PPP law that we have, which was passed in 2017 and which we do not use at this point. So one of the things I advocate is really push forward and also get the private sector involved, because if we need swift actions right now for a recovery, a sustainable recovery, then I think we have to get the private sector involved. The private sector is kind of exhausted due to the impact of the war. And this is where the international donors can really play a major part. So I've heard something about helping out with programs related to the SMEs. Much more can be done, at least to get the private sector in place, downsize the government. We still have a fat government. Although so many positions they're vacant, but we still have to give a chance for the private sector, because this is where we're going to see a difference in the performance and in the economy, and then also in the social fabric, because I think social entitlements will be improved and people will be more at ease if we do that.
Thank you.
If I may,
Najat, you have Ms. Zara, can I give MP Najat has her hand up? Let me give her the word, and then I will definitely come back to you right after.
yes, because I'm not able to raise my hand. I don't know why. Okay.
Sorry. Thank you, Kauthar. Thank you for giving me the floor. Look, I think, Razmik, you're raising a very political question. And the reason why I'm in politics today is because I was trying to do something outside politics, and we've always faced a very, very hard wall in order, to move forward with all the solutions that we had at AUB and with all the hard work that everyone was doing, whether in the private sector or in academia or otherwise. I think we were in complete isolation, and we had a government that was designed to fail every single initiative we come up with. And because of the division, because of the clientelism, and because of dividing all the resources among all the parties that were ruling this country for the last 30 years. So moving forward, we have a chance. I'm not saying that we're gonna do miracles, but we have an opportunity. And I think we need to give people who really mean well in the country this opportunity to start implementing the reforms first. And I say that it is our responsibilities as MP to really work hard on the reforms. And then once we start the recovery based on goodwill and good reforms, I think the private sector is gonna really grow exponentially, because the path is going to be open. So before that, we had every single blockage and every single wall in front of us not to move forward. And in addition to that, we were completely isolated from the outside world. We can see that the outside world now is acknowledging our presence. That's one indication. The second indication is that we have two people in the government who are trying very hard to go by the book and be to stand at equal distances from everyone else. I think things are starting to unblock, and with that, all the power that we have, whether in Lebanon or outside Lebanon, is gonna really help this country stand up, and all the solutions that people have will find a place. I'm very hopeful.
Thank you for spreading some optimism, MP Najat. Ms. Dara, I think I will let you intervene.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if I will. Reduce a bit of the optimism of MP Aoun, but maybe I will add some realism to our reality. Okay, just to get in touch with our reality. If you notice that before, Lebanon went through many crises, and immediately after the crisis, Lebanon used to pick up immediately. Okay, the second year used to report high growth and etc. For this time, it will be different. It will be different because before, the private sector, as rightly said by MP Dr. Alemi, the private sector was the dynamo of the change. Okay, and the private sector used to have the tools to intervene immediately and to be proactive and to invest and to really take the risks, etc. But this time, what is different, and this is the trick, what is different is the financial sector, the banking sector. If we don't have a proper banking sector, we cannot aim high for the private sector to really grow. We witnessed over the past 5 years, despite the movement that we saw around, we really, it was concrete, but still we were not able to really report growth. We were almost stagnant. We couldn't grow. And this will be the case if we cannot fix the banking sector. I think this will be the case. We will not be able to really to grow further. In our survey, I will maybe reveal one of the results of the MSME survey. When enterprises asked about the number one challenge that they have, guess what? It is access to finance. Okay, so they don't have access to finance. They cannot, as coping measure, they used to save or get money from their saving. But even this option is not available now. So really, the trick between having a recovery phase connected to reform, I think the trick is to fix the banking sector. And this is an urgent need if we want to bring back the private sector into the game again. Thank you.
Happen to fully agree with you, Ms. Dara, and having myself just come out of the banking sector, which I was as part of my mission as sustainability consultant, I fully relate. I know that the biggest need is access to finance, and I think maybe I will ask Mr. Hafiz to comment on that factor and to maybe say some closing remarks at the same time.
Okay, yes, obviously access to finance is a very important issue. If we're talking about very small businesses, the microfinance sector has not shut down. And I'm involved with one of the large microfinance organizations in the country, and I can tell you that we are very active, and we are lending money to micro enterprises. And the only thing that stopping us from lending more money is for the organization to have access to funding, which used to be international funding. And a lot of the internationals have stopped dealing with Lebanon because they were waiting for an IMF agreement. I don't know why this has to do with that, but anyway. And now we are seeing some interest from the international donors to deal with us again. So on the micro level, the situation is a little bit better than for the rest of the private sector. For the rest of the private sector, I know that there is almost consensus among political forces, economic thinkers, the public at large, that we need to restructure the entire banking sector and find an overall solution to the banking sector before we go ahead. I'm one of the rare people who disagree with that. And I think that it is very possible to restart access to finance from the banking sector almost immediately, while tackling how we handle the rest of, while dealing with the past of the banking sector. And then we get immediately challenged by the populist sentiment that the banks have to be punished, disbanded, bankrupt, etc., and do away with the current banking sector, which obviously is the punitive approach to the sector itself is not going to grow the economy. We have to make a differentiation between the banks and the bankers, or those who were responsible for managing the banks. I think that the banking sector and the banking network in Lebanon is one of the pillars of our economy. And just because the management of these banks have led the banking sector or participated in the demise of the sector does not mean that we should do away with the sector itself, that today have about 15,000 employees, have hundreds of branches, have a lot of what the private sector needs. So we have proposed, InfoPro has Lebanon Opportunities have launched since 5 years what we call the revival plan, the economic revival plan. We're about to launch its 5th edition this year. And in it, we propose taking a short-term approach, which is allowing banks to lend again by introducing some protections on the currency of repayment. I know that there is a draft law in Parliament that's been lingering now for a while, that Parliament is not enacting it, either because they are afraid of this popular belief, or because they say that we want to resolve the entire banking issue, and that the successive governments have been trying to do this since 2019 unsuccessfully. But yes, obviously, banking is very important for the private sector, and it can actually, some of the banks have started very cautiously providing financing to some of the companies, but not all companies. Most companies don't qualify today, or don't have the tools to borrow at the conditions that these few customers are being able to borrow. Concluding remarks, if I have 1 more minute. it's very important that the conversation continues. It's very important that people like us, whether speakers or the audience of this meeting, have something to say at the table before policies are enacted, before decisions are made. It's very rare that the development community, the civil society, the economic community, the business sector are invited to participate in formulating policy. The best we had in the past is some consultations after the fact or just before the fact as a checklist. We need to be at the table, not just recipients of the decisions that the public sector makes.
Thank you, Mr. Hafiz. I have one question from Namir Younes. Namir, would you like to unmute yourself and go ahead, please?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's a very important topic, obviously, and thank you for that. But we're talking about reconstruction as if we're talking about reconstruction after a natural disaster. And what's absent a bit from that is that we're talking about reconstruction because we have reached some sort of a ceasefire that would allow us to start talking about reconstruction. And the question is a ceasefire enough to embark on reconstruction and start mobilizing resources and calling on resources? Or should we aim at a more stable understanding between the belligerents before we start deploying funding and resources and all other means?
Thank you, Namir. I thought this was more of a question, rather it sounded more like a statement, I think. Am I right to assume as much, right?
I'm sorry?
I assume, did I get cut off? I think you were making a statement rather than asking a question.
No, the question is, should we embark on reconstruction based on a ceasefire and start spending money, or should we aim at a more stable understanding before we deploy resources? That's the question.
Yeah, I think our participants did answer that a little bit. Maybe the most qualified in the room is Ms. Dara. Would you care to comment on Namir's statement?
Yes, thank you. Maybe I don't know. I can see his point. However, that's why there is something that's called the recovery phase and there is a reconstruction phase. And effectively here we are talking about the recovery phase. And we cannot but to invest in having people going back to their villages and having a house to live in and having a road to drive their cars and to have access to electricity and services. So this is regardless of the how much the ceasefire will last. This is regardless. If the people are willing to go back to their villages, the government is liable to support them and to provide all the necessary services. And also the international community supporting the government in this. So this is more, we're talking now about the immediate phase of helping people going back to their villages and also helping in the recovery so they can also the economy can pick up again. So we're talking about the phases. Now, for the long-term reconstructions, another story, and I think there will be another phase of planning for it, and it requires, yes, a solid maybe ceasefire. But now we cannot run, no one can run from the responsibility of helping people going back to their homes.
Can I just come in and add?
Yes, please. I was going to ask you if you can comment and actually make closing remarks.
I think to answer your question, my thoughts are, and building on what Kausar mentioned is also it's the approach of how we do reconstruction. I think it's I think there is no question we need to embark on a reconstruction, in my opinion. I also think that a big part of the conflict drivers are related to socioeconomic grievances, including perceptions of inequity in different regions of the country. And I think this brings me to the point around how we do reconstruction and how we make sure that it's not simply a question of and I don't mean to undermine that, but removing rubble or the physical infrastructure, but the approach in a way that doesn't increase the marginalization or vulnerability of the people and doesn't diminish the capacities of institutions. So I think absolutely we should embark on reconstruction because of the fact that socioeconomic grievances and perceptions of inequality are a root cause of inequality and a root cause of the conflict. My closing remarks are just wanted to say that I really agree with what was said around the importance of PPPs. Lebanon is a very highly privatized economy where when I arrived, it was interesting to see how the CSOs, the NGOs are doing a lot of service delivery. The private sector is doing service delivery. The government, regulating. So you have a different. And I think there's a lot to learn in terms of the next phase of recovery, call it reconstruction or development, where the three of them can work together in order to, leverage each other's expertise moving forward.
Thank you so much. I think, Dara, you're the only one who, Ms. Dara, you're the only one who I haven't asked for closing remarks. If there are any more to add.
No, it's fine from my side.
Very good. I would like to thank what's left of my speakers, Mr. Hafiz, Ms. Dara, Ms. Al-Mesri. Thank you so much for giving the time, for sharing your thoughts, and for allowing us the exchange that was made possible. Because I think, like MP Fadi mentioned, it's this conversation, and I think Mr. Hafiz also mentioned the same thing. It's this conversation that is enriching and that is a driver forward, and definitely the PPP and every single participation and into the synergy of trying to have positivism that MP Najat spread a few minutes ago propagate itself into something we really would be proud to live in, and that's it for me. I thank all of you. I thank the Institute with again from the president down for all their opportunities that they are allocating to our community to be able at least to have a platform where we can share and grow our thoughts and share experiences. That's it for me. I leave it to, I guess, Ms. Josiane is going to take over from here.
Hi, Jamian. Hello. I'm Josiane Shibli from Institute of Finance. I'm librarian. And I want to thank you all for your attending our very, very informative webinar. And see you next Wednesday on the next webinar with Dr. Shadi Abdallah and Dr. Tamara Zain about المنصة الوطنية للإنذار المبكر. رح يكون هو رح يكون بالعربي جماعة الجاي. يعني بنتمنى أكيد رح يوصلكم الانفيتيشن. أكيد بنتمنى تكونوا كلكم حاضرين معنا مثل اليوم. Thank you, Dr. Thank you all speakers also, and thank you, Mrs. Hazmig. We'll see you next Wednesday, please.
A blessed evening. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.